Arthur Laura Hillenbrand wrote the highly anticipated award-winning novel Unbroken based on the real-life events of Louis Zamperini. The novel was turned into a movie and directed by world-renowned actress Angelina Jolie. This novel captures the struggle, pain, and abuse Louis Zamperini went through from his early childhood years to the time he spent as a prisoner of war. At a very young age, the Zamperini family packed their bags, left for Italy, and headed for the United States. Once arrived, they settled in the small town of Torrance, California. There was when Louis first endured his first forms of abuse from the neighborhood boys. They would call him derogatory names, kick and push him around, trying to break his spirit. However, Louis never let them see him break. When they pushed Louis down, he got back up, and when they would hit and punch him, he stood there and took the blows. He never gave in to the tormenting. However, people were angered by young Louis. The police were at his door numerous amounts of times, leaving his older brother Pete to translate for his Italian-speaking mother Louise. When Louis' father, Anthony, would return home, Louis endured forms of abuse from him as well. Poor Louis had no future for him at the rate he was going, until he was caught hiding underneath the bleachers at a track and field event. When the coach confronted Louis, he broke out in a mad sprint to get away. From that moment on, his brother Pete made it his mission to help lead his brother Louis down a correct path, and that was through running. Louis ran every day and won every single competition. He brought fame and fortune to the small town he grew up in. People who grew up with Louis were now worshiping him, and his town called him the Torrance Tornado. After a few days short of his 21st birthday, Louis qualified for the Olympics. He was going to run the 5,000 meter. Despite not placing first, he had the fastest final lap of all times, running 400 meters in 56 seconds flat. That record held for nearly 35 years. Running was Louis' saving grace. It allowed him to develop a sense of pride, determination, and courage. A few short months after Louis returned home from the Olympics, Louis was enlisted in the army. He was going to be a bomber-raider for the fighter jets. Although Louis did everything in his power not to be enrolled in the army, it was inevitable. All men had to fight, including his brother Pete, who was a captain stationed over in San Diego. Louis trained for several months before being deployed in Hawaii. There, he and his crew boarded the Superman, which is what they called their plane. Louis' good friend Phil was the leading captain on the plane. Louis had a sharp eye. Every time they needed a bomb to hit something, Louis would hit it dead on. Even miles away from home, the praise people gave him for his hard work continued on. The next time Louis and his crew were deployed, they were headed towards southern Japan. Louis wrote his mother a letter before boarding, and little did they both know that it was going to be the last time either would hear from each other for the next 3 years. Louis' plane crashed in the middle of the ocean, leaving him, Phil, and their other crewmate, Mac, stranded for nearly 50 days. Unfortunately, Mac ended up dying. Phil and Louis, however, were captured by the Japanese and would spend the next 2 years being held captive. Despite Louis' hard exterior, the prison camp he stayed at, he met the man that would break his spirit. This man was known as the Bird. He was a cruel, cynical man who did everything in his power to break Louis and everything he had. Every day, Louis would endure hard labor, a beating, and limited daily supplies. It was the Bird's motivation to make Louis' last days on Earth a living nightmare. Despite Louis moving to different camps, the Bird came with him. The day finally came where the Japanese soldiers and the other members thought the Bird was going to finally break Louis. After hauling coal in the blistering sun for hours with a broken leg, the Bird ordered Louis to fit a piece of metal over his head, and if he dropped it, he would be shot. 57 long, hard minutes went by, but Louis refused to drop it. It was in that moment, when Louis made eye contact with the Bird, that he knew Louis was never going to break. The Bird envied that he would never be as strong, courageous, and overall a well-rounded person Louis was. That made him snap. The Bird ran to Louis, kicked and punched him until he tired himself out. That left Louis unconscious for 3 days in the scorching heat. When he woke up, he returned to the cabin with his fellow captives. Days passed and the war was dying down, and that meant Japan had lost the war. The Japanese soldiers forced their captives into the water, where they all would be killed. Some men began to cry because they knew that even though they did everything they could to survive, this would be the end. However, as if on cue, as if by some miracle, an American fighter jet flew over the men, signaling that they would be rescued. The men were finally saved. Louis had felt such a sense of relief that he nearly collapsed. Louis was finally allowed to return home to see his family after nearly 3 years away. The first person he ran up to was his mother. She knew all this time, and despite the rumors about Louis's death, that her son was indeed alive. Pete had aged, though, because of Louis's missing, but he never lost faith in his brother. The family was finally complete. Everyone was home and safe. When Louis returned home, he married his love at first sight, Cynthia, and they had 2 children. The first few days of his return, Louis suffered with PTSD and had a severe alcohol addiction. Cynthia tried everything she could to break Louis of his addiction, but it was not until Louis heard a preacher that he berid his alcoholism and PTSD. Louis would therefore go and become a motivational speaker and helped other soldiers by sharing his story with them. He also turned his life to God and put everything he had in his hands. After years of practicing forgiveness, Louis returned to Japan to speak to the men who held him captive for 2 years. He forgave all of them. But when Louis asked to speak to the bird, he refused, envious that Louis was the man the bird wished he could have been. The clip I chose to break down was the one where the bird forced Louis to hold a steel bar over his head after enduring numerous hours of intense labor and doing it all with a broken leg. A total of 57 minutes went by and Louis did not break. That set the bird off and Louis was beaten until unconsciousness. In the clip, you can see at the beginning, Louis makes very little eye contact with the bird, because past times when he looked the bird in the eye, he was beaten. Also, the use of the camera angles draws the audience to the pain Louis Zamperini himself endured. At one point, you can see the shadow of Louis holding a beam over his head, and it represents how Christ was on the cross suffering in immense amounts of pain. Also, in this clip, you can see as Louis is getting beat by the bird, he starts to envision himself running towards the light, maybe finally breaking his spirit or hoping for God to save him. When the bird is done beating Louis, he falls to his knees, as if surrendering, giving up in the fact that he'll never be able to break Louis' spirit. The use of the costumes also helped enhance the use of the clip. Louis was never given any clothes after he left the raft. He spent days after days in the camp wearing the same shirt and pants. The viewer sees how the pants are very dirty and ripped due to being worn all the time. The uniform the bird is wearing, however, shows the viewer the power and control he has over everyone. He has stars and carries around a stick, showing superiority over the other soldiers. The symbolic code is also used in this clip. Louis wears a ring that his mother gave him, symbolizing the strong relationship between him and his mother. It was as if that Louis in the clip was running towards his mom, hoping that she would save him through that tough time.